Hey folks, Brandon Vigliarola with the Register, and I'm here today with Gaye Gordon-Byrne, Executive Director of the Repair Association, to talk about right to repair. Gaye, thanks for joining me, and on quite the big day for the right to repair movement, too.
Yeah, it has been. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know not only do we have that EU-wide right to repair law that was just passed in Europe, but like you were telling me a few minutes ago, we're also just minutes after we're speaking just minutes after the Colorado Senate passed their right to repair bill for the state as well. So, lots of good rules flying around lately. So, what do you think? I mean, maybe not Colorado because it's just for a state, but EU wide, right? Does this rule passed in the EU make sense as a template for the United States to look at a national right to repair law?
Hmm. Good question. And I don't think it works as a
Okay.
template because the way that laws are passed in the US and the way that regulations and directives are done in the EU are just very different.
Hmm.
I don't think we can transpose the concept, but not the execution
Oh,
because
yeah.
yeah, it's the way the different governments work. It has
Right, but
nothing
you,
to do
you
with the concept.
right. So you think the rules in the bill, the repair rules, the repairability rules, are those something that we can aspire to? I mean, like what I mean basically, are there shortcomings in this bill that you've seen or this law that are going to make it easy for companies to subvert, do you think it'll be effective?
I think in the context of the EU, it
Hmm.
will be effective, but the goals are different.
Okay.
The goals of right to repair in the US, at least as we've been promoting them, are to create a opportunity of competition for repair, not
Right.
to create a requirement for repair. So the
Okay.
goals are
Right.
different, and so therefore the laws are going to be and are quite different. So the EU does a much better job, I think, of making requirements on manufacturers related to design, and we're
Right.
terrible at that here in the US. We're just terrible at it. So, but
Yeah.
I think the way that the laws will work together will be very powerful because a manufacturer that is designing things to be more repairable in the EU is probably going to also sell those same things here in the US. And the
Right.
requirements
Right.
that we make of making repair information and service materials broadly available will also percolate or cross the pond into the EU. So I think it's a good coordinated effort, but they're different efforts.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of like right like for example, you can see that in the hardware with like Apple, the USB-C iPhone now, right? As opposed to, they're not going to make that change just for the hardware in Europe. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the software, right? I don't think the EU version of iOS is probably going to make it in the United States anytime soon with those third-party app stores and stuff. That's probably not going to make its way here
Yeah,
since
I don't
it's
know about the App Store thing because it's really
yeah.
kind of off my radar. But
Gotcha. That's fair.
yeah, I think having some variations in software is probably pretty likely, just like
Yeah.
there's with personal computers and having variations in the keyboards.
Right.
Just
Right. Yeah, you can print a keyboard differently, right? But like again, at the end of the day, you're not going to make some devices with one kind of port and some with the other. But I guess speaking about Apple, right, and sort of maybe expectations that haven't quite been met. We've had Apple's right to repair position. They were supporting a bill in California last year and talking about nationwide right to repair. But a lot of that came with the caveat that it has to be almost entirely on their terms, right?
mhm.
They made this concession recently with used parts, right? Do you think that concession is actually, a win for U.S. right to repair, or is it like I've heard Kyle Wiens from iFixit basically said it was pretty much complete theater, right? He didn't believe that it was going to have much effect. I'm curious as to what you
Yeah,
think about Apple's concession.
the details are kind of thin on
Yeah.
what Apple exactly is going to do. I mean, they graciously are saying, "Gee, we'll let you use an existing used authentic Apple part," but they haven't made that clear in terms of how far back in time you can do it. I mean,
Right.
I, I have a fairly old model, and it would strike me that I should be able to use a used part that is not an iPhone 15.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in practice, it really is just kabuki.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's yeah.
I don't think there's not enough details to let me say, yeah, it's a real win. It's a step. Um,
Right.
but I think just as we saw today with the bill that was passed in Colorado, and that's not going to float for very long.
Right. What parts of that bill don't you think will float?
No, I mean the Apple's position on the used
Oh,
parts.
right.
Oh yeah,
Right.
no, and that's also in the EU bill where the
Hmm.
Apple cannot prevent you from using a third party part or used part. So
Right.
in that respect, we're very much lined up, and that Apple can say they don't want to do it, but they're going to have to.
Yeah, right. Again, it's a hardware thing, not a software thing, right? And it's gonna be hard to enforce that in one place and not the other. But I guess speaking to the broader issue, right? We don't have a nationwide right to repair law in this country still.
Correct.
More and more states are passing their own, but the federal government hasn't acted. Do you think things like what Apple just did, is an attempt on the part of a company to say, "Hey, whoa, you're right. We don't need a nationwide bill. It's okay, right?" Is that an effort to stall things on their part by saying things like, used part kabuki theater, right? Is that going to stall nationwide legislation? Do you think it's going to? Is there a a deeper reason for them doing something like this?
Well, they're always going to be stalling, and they're always
Right.
going to be trying to avoid anything that they're going to be required to do that they don't already make money at.
Right.
So I distrust their motives on everything. But going back to the premise that there should be a nationwide right to repair, I
Hmm.
don't think that that's really correct
Okay.
because we looked at, of course, trying to do something nationally right out of the gate back in 2010. And the
Hmm.
problem is that Congress, there's not a real good hook in the way that there is in state law. States control general business law. They get
Hmm.
to tell manufacturers, you have to do A, B, C, and D in exchange for a license to do business in my state. And that has turned out to be really, really powerful. The auto industry did it. And it didn't work out entirely because they agreed on a memorandum of understanding rather than pushing more bills. And we've
Right.
learned from that experience and saying, hey, we need more bills. We need more state laws, and we need more enforcement because what happened was it was only valid in Massachusetts. So we're saying, okay, I don't know. I don't think we have to go to all 50 states, but we certainly have to go to more than one,
Right.
which
So
is
you
where
think
we are
that kind
today.
of right, right. So basically, if we have enough states pass these kind of
Mhm.
rules, we won't really need a federal one because the companies will simply, it's going to be in their best interest to kind of just let this be the status quo, more or
Well,
less.
just
Or
like you mentioned with the USB-C cord,
right,
with Apple, eventually
hmm,
they're going to say, it's impossible for us to keep these parts and tools from crossing state lines.
right,
We're just going to have to make it happen, and
yeah,
yeah, suck it up.
yeah. And I don't know if you've seen. Speaking of recent kind of right to repairability news, but I know recently there was a sort of shifting gears a bit, but not really, right? There was a report from the UN in e-waste recently. Apparently, it's growing 5 times faster than we can recycle it, given our current facilities. Right? I think what one of my coworkers took out of that was that we sort of have an obligation to enact these sort of rules, to head off this e-waste problem. What do you think about sort of the obligatory nature of right to repair, given our high degree of electronic waste? Do you think that enacting these walls will cut it down, or is it simply that recycling is too difficult?
Well, recycling really is too difficult.
Hmm.
It's an expensive process to do correctly, and the temptation on the part of most everybody is just get rid of it.
Right.
Um, we're not addressing that directly, but we are basically in the if you repair something and you keep it in use for longer, it will what they call bend the curve.
Hmm.
So rather than the exponential growth of e-waste, there's some opportunity for consumers to individually act in a way that bends the curve. And
Right.
there'll be just less because there's less flowing in. If you don't have to replace your phone every 2 years and you keep it for 4 years, that's a 50% difference. And that's just one
Yeah.
product. So it can
Right.
make a huge difference. Um, but people have to want to fix their stuff first, which we
Right.
think they do. And we're
Oh,
just
that's
trying to
good.
make sure that they have choices. Yeah, I think we've been told for a long time that we don't want to fix our stuff, and my
Hmm.
experience is that's not true at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
maybe.
I noticed it with people my age, right? I'm in my early 40s, and I feel like a lot of my friends, growing up as a millennial, we might have been a bit more cash strapped than older people when we were at a certain age, right? So I feel like a lot of my friends have this kind of shifted emphasis on long term quality, repairable things than say, um, people who might just be kind of used to a disposable culture. And so, yeah, I really hope you're right on that. That we're shifting in that direction, because I think that would be a fantastic boon for the future of right to repair in general. So, what do you think? Do you think we're moving in the right direction in the United States with more state laws being passed? I mean, do you see us hitting a tipping point on this soon?
Actually, I do. Things have been racing along so quickly in the past 6 months that
Mm-hmm.
it's really become hard for us to keep track. It's overwhelming, and it's encouraging, because we're seeing states not just come to us and say, hey, we want help. They go to each other and they say, hey, I really like what you did in Oregon or Michigan, or whatever it is. They're talking to each other and
Mm-hmm.
bringing these bills forward. So a little bit out of control, which is a little discomforting. But the the sense of momentum I have is really, really strong. And like said in that EFF piece that just came out, we
Mm-hmm.
did catch the car, and we've now sort of come to expect to catch the car, as
Right.
opposed to wondering if we will ever catch the car, using that metaphor. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I am enormously encouraged, and the people that we've had a chance to work with, I think, share that sense of optimism.
Well, that's fantastic. That's good to hear, right? One of the good things coming out of kind of a bad couple of years for the tech industry, right? It might be that there's some optimism, at least on the end of creating less waste. So
Yeah, I mean, if that's your goal, it's one of the happy, of the many things that Right to Repair does, that's one of the really positive downstream consequences. We don't have to make anybody go to the recycling center. We don't have to mandate more kinds of pickups and sorting. We just let people fix their stuff.
yeah.
And that will reduce the volume all by itself.
Well, Gaye, thanks so much for joining me. This was a great chance to chat about some of the latest in right to repair. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah. And as always, you can read about more of the latest right to repair news on the Register.